Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be presenting the second journal of the day. The moderator for my session is PDS sir. So, with time, the vitrectomy system has evolved. It started with 17 gauge cutter, and now we have the opportunity to use 27 gauge cutter. So, not only the vitrectomy system has improved in terms of the width of the instrument, but also in other aspects like the cut rate, the fluidics, and others. So with this, when the systems are changing, the fluidics behind it are also changing, and so it is important for the surgeons to know what these changes will have, how it will affect the surgery. So aspiration is mainly maintained by the type of the pump. Normally, in the Constellation machine, we have Venturi pump to achieve the aspiration, and as the aspiration increases, the outflow also increases. Gauge system is the gauge size inversely proportional to the flow, because we have already seen the larger the radius, more is the flow. So if the gauge size is narrow, it will provide higher resistance to the flow, and the resultant flow will be less. Larger the port size, more will be the flow, but after some time it will reach a plateau. Cut rate and duty cycle are however related to each other. When the cut rate increases, the duty cycle reduces. And when the duty cycle reduces, the flow also reduces. So, to overcome this problem of cut rate and duty cycle, the modern machines have separated the duty cycle and the cut rate by mechanism like they have used a dual pneumatic cutter, in which the cutter was opened by a separate air pipe and closed by a separate air pipe, and another mechanism was to use another lumen inside the cutter, or to use a dual blade cutter. So by doing so, even at high cut rate, the duty cycle was always open. The flow between the vitreous and the aqueous are different because of the difference in the properties. Vitreous is a heterogeneous substance, and it exhibits viscoelastic properties. So more the viscoelasticity, more is the resistance to flow. So when the cut rate increases, the viscosity of the vitreous reduces, and it increases the flow rate. Also, the another important properties of vitreous is the elasticity, and it can deform. So during cutting, because of its elastic properties, it can exert traction on the retina. But at high cut rate, the vitreous bite size is very small, so the amount of traction on the retina is also less. To summarize, there should be a balance between the infusion system and the outflow system. Infusion system is no longer a concern in modern vitrectomy machines because they are automatically controlled. However, outflow is affected by systems like when we increase the vacuum, outflow increases by larger port size, by high cut rate, and it decreases with the narrower gauge instruments. So, before going to the main topic, let us look into the difference in the different cutter and their properties. Ultravit, which we have now, it's a typo error. It's a 7500 cutter. It's a single action pneumatic probe, not to be confused with single pneumatic probe. All the cutters here has dual pneumatic probe. Single action means only single blade. Ultravit, advanced Ultravit also has a single cutter, but the difference is that it has a beveled tip. And Hypervit, it is a dual action cutter. You can see from the picture that there is a two cutter, and the cut rate is 20,000. And at advanced Ultravit, the cut rate is 10,000. Now, the main difference between the Hypervit and the Ultravit is that Ultravit has a two cutter, so it can cut vitreous twice. While moving forward, it makes one cut, and while moving back, it makes the second cut. And also, the duty cycle is always open. So this is a small video showing the difference between two cutter, Ultravit and Hypervit. We can see there is second lumen inside the cutter, and when the cutter moves to and fro, the lumen is always open, and it can cut in two cycles. And also the last, we can see that the pulsatility is low. Here we can see the cutter is always open. Coming to the main topic of the day, that is comparison between the dual action vitrectomy probe, that is the hypervit, compared with the single action probe, that is the ultravit. It is in pre issue, supposed to be published in November 22 in Retina Journal. Here they have looked into three parameters: flow rate, near field effect, and retinal traction. We'll see later what this near field effect is. They have measured aqueous outflow with the BSS. Flow rate was calculated by a software called LabView program, but they did not use any infusion system. Aqueous flow rate was measured for three different cycle: open, closed, and 50-50, and they have reported mean plus standard deviation for both 25 and 27 gauge cutters at maximum vacuum and at maximum cut rate. They also measured vitreous outflow in the same way. Here also they did not use any infusion cannula. Also, they have done an open sky vitrectomy, and the vitreous was porcine cadaveric vitreous extracted and refrigerated before use. Now, what is near field effect? Near field effect is nothing but if we introduce a probe during vitrectomy, it causes disturbance around the vitrectomy probe, which generates a electric like field because of the polarization of the molecules around it. And pulsatility is defined as flow with periodic fluctuation. To measure near field and pulsatility of the flow, they used a simulated model where they have charged particles, and the movement of these particles were captured with CCD camera. And the Reynolds number was used to assess the near field. The Reynolds number is just a number which says whether a flow is laminar or turbulent. And pulsatility of flow was quantified by root mean square of velocity. To measure the traction, they have developed a system where they have attached the vitreous to a cantilever beam, and when the vitrectomy cutter caused traction on the vitreous, the deflection they could measure with the cantilever beam. Analysis was done by Welch t-test. Moving on to the result, for aqueous outflow, they have compared it at maximum cut rate, at maximum vacuum, and different duty cycle. At maximum cut rate, they have seen that both the 25 and 27 gauge system, there is no change with the change in duty cycle, and the cut rate increased with the increase in vacuum. Now, when they compared between the hypervit and the ultravit, they have seen that the aqueous outflow is more for hypervit compared to the ultravit, as seen in the graph. It is around 67% more in open duty cycle, 62% more in closed, in a 50-50, and 65% more in case of closed duty system. It was seen more for both the gauge. Vitreous outflow also similarly compared with cut rate, duty cycle, and vacuum. So with increase in the cut rate, they have seen that the vitreous outflow has increased. By now, we already know the reason why. Now, there was no change with the change in the duty cycle. The flow rate remained almost similar. And with change in the vacuum, it was seen that when the vacuum increased, the flow rate also increased. However, for hypervit, 15% less vacuum was required compared to the ultravit. And when they compared between the two systems, hypervit and ultravit, it was seen that the flow rate was more for hypervit. Now, coming to the near field effect, the near field effect for hypervit was stronger compared to the other system. Pulsatility, which denotes the turbulence, is also low for hypervit, and the flow was more stable. From the graph, we can see that at matched flow rate and vacuum, advanced ultravit has more pulsatility, that is more turbulence, than the hypervit. Now, traction. For the traction, when they measured traction, they have seen that hypervit probe generated less traction compared to the ultravit for both 25 gauge system and 27 gauge system. So this is a small video comparing between the two cutters of traction. We can see on the left hand side the turbulence is more in ultraweight, whereas in the right hand side the turbulence is less. So to summarize the result, aqueous outflow and vitreous outflow both increased with the increase in the vacuum. But in aqueous outflow, there is no change with the change in duty cycle or cut rate, whereas vitreous outflow has increased with increase in cut rate. Also, the hyperweight had stronger flow field, but the size of the field was small. Lower pulsatility or turbulence and more stable aspiration for hyperweight. The traction generated by hyperweight was also less. So, since this hyperweight compared with the ultraweight showed improved fluidics in all the aspects as already discussed. However, there were various limitations in the study, like they have used porcine vitreous that too after refrigerating it, which might, because of which the properties might have changed. They have done open sky vitrectomy, whereas vitrectomy in a closed chamber, the fluidics might be different. There is potential difference when we do vitrectomy in an experimental setup without any infusion. Also, there is difference in the tip between the two. Ultravit has a bevel tip, whereas hypervit has a flat tip. And they have measured the traction only under matched flow condition. They did not check it under high vacuum. So to conclude, the hypervit had improved fluidics in all the hot aspect. Like when we had increased the hot flow rate, the other things like pulsatility and turbulence was less. So we can like consider it for future in vitrectomy. That's all. These are my acknowledgement. Thank you.
Thank you. I think presenter and moderator were very angry with the chairman of class giver because it was like hyper wit. He gave about 1 week time. The topic was dry. Neither she knew nor me, and but she had done a tremendous work. Yeah, the basics of how the machine works, and she has completely analyzed, went to the OT, and prepared that. The topic is same. I'm as new as anybody. Uh, the only take-home message what the article gave was that what any idea what which cutter we have been using, senior residents? Debarati Ultravit or what?
Yes, sir. Ultravit 7500 we mostly use. I
Okay.
think we have 10,000 also.
Hmm.
So I don't know whether it is being used or not.
Okay, most of us are using the pack where the 7500 is there. So they have come out with the 10,000. And we are-
10,000 is available with us routinely.
yeah,
Only
we
thing
have
they
been
was
using
not
with the
supply, but it is
10,000.
there.
Okay, so we have 10,000 also, which has a flat tip, and which has a the new one which is coming is the 20,000. So the whole concept of the cutter system they want to evolve into the 20,000 because of the dual cutting mode. That way, the flow which is coming out or the fluid coming out and where the IOP ability is there, that is taken care by the new technology. The whole the deficiency, the fluid instability or IOP instability we used to see in 20 gauge. So there again the flow rate was having a issue. So that has been taken over, and then this new concept of the dual cut has come. Anything?
Yeah, Dr. LG would like to say something. Chetan.
Sir,
Yeah, can I make a comment?
yes, sir, please.
No, I was thinking that because of the two blades on two sides cutting, would the vitrectomy time be half now? Number one. Number two, technically speaking, the life of the probe may be longer in the sense, although this is a disposable probe from their point of view, from our point of view, probably the life of the probe also may be prolonged because each edge will be used half the time. So I feel that one, vitrectomy time may be halved, and two, the life of the probe can be prolonged.
Yeah, theoretically speaking, what sir is saying is right. But basically, like a machine is same, uh, software is same. Only thing is cutter design is change here, and that's why, because cutting twice and it become practically 20,000, but basically it's 10,000 strokes only. And we time only will tell us now whether it will last longer or not. Though theoretically sounds good. Also, most important, flow has significantly increased because it's now port is open all the time. But that sometimes can be really scary in the sense, and that's exactly reason they are not coming out 10,000 with 23 gauge, because they are worried themselves that flow will be too high and you have to go down. What Chetan has known, I have used this, we are using dark machine. Even 150 flow is quite high, and then even using a flow mode, suction is so much, sometimes retina really you feel unstable while working close to the retina. And probably the same thing will happen here when if they go higher. So most important thing here is, yes, flow is high. We'll have to reduce our suction, not at 300, 400. Probably again we go up to with around 150, what we used to use always in 20 gauge system. And it's, I think, same thing. Port is all the time open here. So duty cycle again will not have much importance here as such now. So that concept will slowly go because this port is open 100% time. But yes, probably, I mean, theoretically speaking, yes, hopefully cutter will last longer. So we may able to save on some. Alcon may not be happy with that if you give that concept, but the hope that it will work out that way.
So the dog design is same as this one, sir.
Yeah.
The twin dynamic cutter, TDC
Yes,
cutter,
yes.
same design as what they have. These people have done it with
Yeah,
Hyperbit.
only thing is dark having like a tip is flat here. It will be bevel. It is bevel. 10,000 is bevel. 20,000 it will come back again same.
What is the aspiration settings for this Hyperbit?
So, ma'am, they have checked at maximum aspiration, that is at 650, and they have 650 for ultravit, and they have seen what is the flow rate match. What is that flow rate that will match at 650 vacuum for ultravit? So they have seen that the vacuum required for hypervit was around 20-30% less compared to that 650 of ultravit.
Okay, so you can reduce the this thing aspiration.
Yeah.
Hyperbit,
Yes.
or you have to keep it high, because I think if the flow rate is high, you will have to keep the aspiration also high.
For aspiration meaning vacuum, you are saying?
Vacuum.
Yeah, they have already said like we have to adjust the vacuum and reduce it. For the
Because it
It
is
has to be
open mode.
reduced, Dr. Dhanashri, not high, because port is always open, and because of high speed, effective particle size is reduced significantly, and that's why overall effective flow increases. So you have to use a low vacuum compared to what you are using with this.
Lower than what we are doing in the ultraviolet.
Yeah, exactly.
That reduces the turbulence at the port, which reduces the turbulence at the vitreous, again attached retina. So the retina behind the vitreous. So the turbulence is reduced. Basically, the whole thing is about turbulence at the port end. So if there's less turbulence, there's less likelihood that you will have retina flapping too much. They will come up with that. So they can't have a beveled port for that. I don't think it's beveled.
this is not bevel, but hypervit has bevel tip also. In Alcon website I have seen, but the comparison was they've used flat tip.
I think if I can give an explanation as to why turbulence is reduced, it's like this. If you have a single side cutting port like the ultravit probe, as the opening is closed by the guillotine, when it travels down, the port is closed. So when the port is closed, but the vacuum is still on because you're still pressing the suction. So the vacuum is waiting to act, but it is not able to act because the port is closed. The minute you open the port, when the guillotine goes backwards, suddenly the suction gets opened up because the suction is always on. So this is what produces the violent changes in the suction on the tissues around the probe tip because of the constant closing and opening. But by keeping the port constantly open with just cutting going on, you avoid the turbulence. That is the advantage of this dual cutter. In fact, this dual cutter mode is nothing new. It was there even about 14, 15 years back, if I remember right. We had a dual cutter system with the blade cutting on both sides.
Twin blade, they used to call the two slits were
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
Bosch and Lomb has come with that.
Exactly. Bajulom had it.
Sir, any other question?
No, just excellent presentation by Debarati. I think she has done a lot
I
of hard
think,
work.
yes. I think we can give a clap to her. Very short duration and very nicely prepared.
Thank you.
I must admit that the presentations were excellent. Very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.